Hello and welcome. My name is Mike Bombard. I'm one of the pre-sales cloud architects here at CloudBolt. And today we're going to be covering off, another video in our How Do I Do Something in CloudBolt video series. This particular video, we're going to be covering how do I run a post-sync VMs hook in CloudBolt. So we're going to talk a little bit about this as we get into this, but really I want to start by talking through what is the business value and why are we even talking through this feature inside of the CloudBolt platform. So CloudBolt has a capability where we make it really easy to onboard existing workloads into the platform. We're effectively, with this video though, we're taking it from more than just ingesting things into CloudBolt and then manually assigning them. This is the next iteration that we see a lot of organizations go to is automated Brownfield ingest. Excuse me, that means that they are going through and defining exactly what features and characteristics about these workloads they're going to bring into CloudBolt. They may have existing metadata on those machines that maybe identify who should own the machine or what group it should belong in, or we even have some customers that have things like lease dates that are set inside of vCenter as just an attribute on there. So we're going to just take one of those use cases and show how to create one of these post-sync VMs orchestration actions, and we're going to walk through that process to show you exactly how to set this up and how you might address this for your individual environment. One of the things about this particular video is every customer that I've talked to does this a little bit differently. They may leverage like folders inside of vCenter to determine which group might own a resource, or maybe there are tags or attributes. CloudBolt has the flexibility built into the platform to allow you to build out your use case very specifically and very prescriptively so that you can reduce manual errors, save yourself time, and ultimately in the long run, this gives you a single interface to manage all of your cloud resources with automated onboarding regardless of what tools have provisioned them in the first place. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and switch screens. Okay, so we are now into my instance of CloudBolt. I'm going to start out on my servers tab. So to get here, if you're following along, you go to resources and then servers inside of the system. My view is currently filtered to show servers that I can see inside of my IT group. So I'm going to clear those filters. I don't want to just see things that are inside of my IT group, but we're going to talk about the onboarding process in CloudBolt. So one of the really handy things inside of the CloudBolt system is anytime you onboard a new cloud endpoint, whether it's vCenter, AWS, Azure, today's session is really going to center around vCenter workloads, but this is a similar process for each of those endpoints as we get into this. So we have a number of machines that show up in here, and you'll notice that a lot of these are part of an unassigned group inside of CloudBolt. The unassigned group is a special purpose group that has been predetermined to be something that we're leveraging for onboarding. The only people that should have access to this unassigned group are probably super administrators inside of CloudBolt. And the reason that they would have access to it is because if I wanted to, I can give them the ability to come in and say, we have these 6 servers. We know that these servers should be assigned to group A, and we can allow them to go through and leverage this change attributes action. They can then go through and assign the appropriate owner for these resources. They can assign the appropriate groups. And with one bulk action, these resources, these servers would be available for management under the group and owners that we've assigned. So this is kind of the manual process that I talked about in the introduction where customers are going through, and this is kind of out of the box behavior. We do inventory these servers and pull in all of their metadata out of the box. But a lot of times there's other metadata that we want to capture about these resources as well. I typically recommend this manual approach up to maybe 500, 700, 800, maybe even 1,000 servers. If you understand your servers really well and you have some administrators who are detail oriented and can make these selections. However, when we start to get above a certain threshold, it really makes sense to start automating this onboarding process so that we don't have to assign groups or owners or things like that Again, a lot of times those are things that have already been captured inside of vCenter or AWS or Azure. One of the ways we see customers do those are with attributes, and that's kind of what we're going to tackle here today. I have a customer who's requesting that they basically have an attribute or a list of attributes on their server. Number one, they want to ingest all of those attributes into CloudBolt, and that's a different subject for a different time. There's actually a content library item that handles that ingest. But the second piece to that is they're currently doing a manual kind of lease process where they have dates already assigned to their servers. So they want to take this date and they want this to correlate on those existing resources to an expiration date inside of CloudBolt. That way the lease process can be shifted from their current manual process over to CloudBolt in an automated fashion. Again, this would be a similar process. Maybe I have an owner field that's defined in my custom attributes as well, or a group that we've assigned inside of custom attributes. I even help customers with folder structure where, we walk down the folder structure inside of vCenter, and we know that everybody inside of my IT folder should belong to my IT group. So we can take these servers as we ingest them in CloudBolt, write an automated action to say, if these servers belong to the unassigned group, we want to go out into vCenter and figure out what folder they live in. And if they live inside of a folder that corresponds to a CloudBolt group, we want to auto-assign them to that group so that that group can manage their resources. So again, this is going to be a similar process. We're not going to tackle the folder hierarchy in this video, but we are going to be tackling this custom attributes with the VM lease attribute here. So we're going to go through the process to read this in CloudBolt, leveraging that post-sync orchestration hook. And at the end of the day, once this is done, at least for this one server, maybe we'll add this to 2 or 3 other servers, we're going to find an inventory of the server inside of CloudBolt. We're also then going to find any attributes that are set inside of vCenter and set that expiration date based off of the attribute inside of vCenter. So that's kind of what we're targeting today. I've actually cheated a little bit on this video. I think for a lot of these, I've started these from scratch. I actually had been poking around with this a little bit earlier today just to figure out. I've never written a post-sync action, so I wanted to make sure that I had most of the process down before diving into this, but we'll still uncover everything that I went through to get to the point to where I'm at already. So it's not complete yet, but we'll be finishing and wrapping that up on this call. Okay, so now that we've talked through the business case, talked through the business value that this video is going to showcase, let's get into the meat of things. So orchestration actions in CloudBolt, we have this capability that we call orchestration actions. And these are really handy because they allow you to prescriptively fire automations at very specific points inside of CloudBolt. One of the first one that I think customers typically handle are going to be these provision server hook points, where we can take an orchestrated action as your servers go through the provisioning process, so that at the very right point, so maybe after the server gets built at like this post-provision point, maybe one of the things we want to do is join an OU and an AD domain for all of our Windows servers, things along those lines. But for this specific use case, we're actually going to be using a different job state, which is going to be the synchronized VMs from resource handlers. So we have this post-sync VMs orchestration hook where we can see that it executes the end of a sync VMs from resource handler's job. My hope and my expectation here is that after we've run that sync VMs from resource handler's job, it's going to fire this orchestration action. It's going to go through all of the servers that don't have an expiration date. It's going to reach out to vCenter and determine, does it have that attribute set? If it does, then we want to set the corresponding expiration date inside of CloudBolt. And this could be a recurring job or you could leave this orchestration hook enabled for all time, and that just automatically, if somebody's adding that expiration date inside of vCenter, it would get updated. But I think really a better use for this would be we're setting the expiration date as kind of our initial import kind of thing. And that would enable us to effectively shift those expiration dates and those lease processes into CloudBolt to make it more of an automated look and feel around how we're going to expire resources inside of the system. So this is what we're working toward. I'm going to jump over into my IDE environment, which I use PyCharm for this. A couple of my other videos I go through setup for leveraging PyCharm, but I'm using PyCharm on my local desktop. It synchronizes all of my scripts that I've written over to my CloudBolt appliance that I'm developing against. I also have an SSH window open here at the bottom of the screen where I'm using something called Shell Plus inside of CloudBolt. Shell Plus is an interactive console to allow us to talk directly to the database inside of CloudBolt. So as I go through and build plugins for CloudBolt, I usually have Shell Plus up and running somewhere because I can go through and get live data and validate that what I'm building is in fact correct. So I have this post-sync VMs from expiration date. The format for this I actually took from another orchestration hook inside of the CloudBolt Forge. So I kind of pasted this from the CloudBolt Forge and have started from there. So the CloudBolt Forge is an open source GitHub repository with a lot of different samples for CloudBolt, working with CloudBolt, and that's just kind of where I've started. The first thing that I did in here is I created a global variable called lease-date attribute. So the reason that I did this is in my environment, if you recall, I have this vCenter server. The attribute that I'm using is called VM_lease, but the customer that I'm building this for has called it something different. So this gives us a little bit of flexibility, allows us to share things out. I like to have variable-driven orchestration so that we don't have to make changes inside of code. We can make changes in the environment as we shift these pieces of code between different environments. So this VM lease is what I'm going to end up putting in there once we're prepared for that piece. This is under the covers. CloudBolt leverages the Django web framework. So what you see is this Python module is leveraging Django templating inside of CloudBolt. So these double curly brackets, when we get to the CloudBolt piece of the puzzle, it's going to create an input parameter in CloudBolt called lease-date attribute, where I'm going to set that as VM_lease. So we'll cover that in a bit more detail here in just a little bit. The run method here inside of this Python module, the run method is the insertion point for CloudBolt operations for most of the things we do. This is also the same for this post VM sync hook. So the first thing that I'm going to do in my run hook, though, is I'm going to go through and I'm going to get all of my vSphere resource handlers, because I only want this to happen for vSphere resource handler synchronization. I may have a separate job that runs for other resource handlers, so things like AWS and Azure. Maybe there's a separate job that runs to identify how to pull in maybe lease dates or owners or groups for those types of objects as well. I am getting all of the vCenters first. I'm then looping through those vCenters, and the reason that I'm doing this is I want to be able to, when we talk to vCenter via API, because I need to use the PyVMomi API here, I want to get the PyVMomi API once. I could also just go through and get all of my server objects across all of my vCenter resource handlers and loop through those. But the challenge is I could be bouncing back and forth between different vCenters, and I want to make sure that we're operating in as efficient of a manner as we can. So I'm looping through each of these vCenters. Each of those vCenters, I'm getting the list of servers for that vCenter. And let's just talk through Django filtering a little bit here. So in CloudBolt, all of our servers are under a model called server. Pretty self-explanatory. But if I go down to my Shell Plus window here, I can do server.objects.all, and I can see a list of all the servers that are inside of the CloudBolt system. Now, one of the challenges you'll run into here is that in CloudBolt, this is going to be 20,000 some servers, even though there's only a couple hundred active ones in my environment at this point in time, because my instance has been running for 4 years. We've spun up a lot of test instances and spun them right back down. So one of the things I would recommend doing as you're building automation, we might not care about archived instances inside of CloudBolt. So one of the things you may want to start working with are what we call filters. And one of the big ones that I would recommend looking into is making sure that you are getting resources that have the appropriate life cycle set. In this case, it's going to be a status that's equal to active for my server objects. And we can see that here. I don't want anything that's historical, which would be the equivalent of an archived objects in CloudBolt. And I also only want to get, because I'm looping through each vCenter, I only want to get the servers that are associated with our resource handler ID that matches the vCenter that we're looping through. So, and then finally, I only want to get the servers that don't, I'm excluding any servers that have a value set for or a custom field value set for the field that has the name of expiration date. So I don't want to get any servers that have expiration date set. We want to exclude those because those already have an expiration date set. At that point, I would assume that CloudBolt has taken over the lease process, so that we're not managing leases in two different places. So we're going to exclude those for now. If we needed to change that behavior, we could. Maybe we're always pulling from vCenter, and if we can update the values in CloudBolt based off of what our business logic is. Next thing I'm doing, this is just some PyVMomi oriented stuff. From that vCenter server, I'm getting my API wrapper, which is just under the covers, is in CloudBolt. And why don't we do this? One of the things that I will point out with CloudBolt, when you're developing against CloudBolt, we have a database model page that would allow you to navigate the things that I'm doing here in code. I've navigated a lot of these so many times I just know where to go. But if you go to alladmin/doc/models in your CloudBolt instance, you can view the entire database schema inside of CloudBolt. So let's go ahead and look at, we have our, I don't remember, vSphere resource handler. It's the type that we got. So that's the type of resource handler that we're getting to. And then from the vSphere resource handler, if we go down and look at, we should see get API wrapper, I believe. Here's our get API wrapper method. There's not a ton of description there, and I'm wondering if we call out, maybe we don't call out, because it's a wrapper of somebody else's technology. Maybe we don't show that. I don't know that we show the wrappers in the database. Interesting. But even if it doesn't show here, what's really handy is in Shell Plus, I can go out and get my vCenter. Let's see if I have one already. So I have my vCenter. I can do that get API wrapper method, and I can save that as my wrapper. And then I can start to learn what exists in that wrapper just by hitting period and then a tab. So I can cycle through all of the functions and methods and things like that in Shell Plus across the entire CloudBolt estate. So even when maybe we don't document things like wrappers, just again, I believe that's because we're representing somebody else's APIs here. You can navigate this in Shell Plus and figure out what you're trying to do. So just a little bit of a hint there, but now that we have our PyVMomi wrapper, I'm going to do a couple of PyVMomi based things, and in full transparency, I got most of this from ChatGPT. So I've been going through asking ChatGPT how to do these things in PyVMomi, and it's kind of walked me through those things. After I get that PyVMomi wrapper, then we can start to use things that ChatGPT has available. So the next thing, so that the SI, this is our service instance in PyVMomi. We need to get that. Then from our service instance, we can get our search index. Then from the search index, the first thing that I'm going to do is for my service instance, I need to get an attribute key. So vCenter works a little funny in that when we have a custom attribute, this is under the covers. It's something that's allowed or something values. It's effectively a custom field in vCenter that has a key associated with it. This is not a per VM. This is actually when you create a custom attribute, regardless of whether it's on your VMs. Like if I flip over to 001, you'll notice all of my custom attributes show on all of my virtual machines, and that's because the custom attribute itself, the attribute, is set at a global level inside of vCenter. My values are then set on individual VMs. So kind of like if you've worked with CloudBolt, we have custom fields. Custom fields they're parameters that are set globally, but you can also have values that are set on each one of your objects. Kind of similar look and feel. So what I'm doing here is I'm using this get attribute key method, which I've created here, I'm actually passing in the wrong value right now. That's where I want to set my lease date attribute. So I'm going to pass that into my get attribute key, and then we're going to go down to that method below and just kind of walk through what we're doing there. So get attribute key, we have our service instance. Again, I can't take any credit for this. ChatGPT kind of walked me through a lot of this between that and GitHub Copilot. It's kind of building out this as I go, and it kind of walked me through, first of all, getting, I need to do that. I'm going to head back over here real quick. So here's where I got the sample where I'm going through. So I don't actually need my VM list at all. So I can get rid of my object view in that because my custom fields manager is coming right from my service instance. And we'll walk through that in code real quick. I usually do this in Shell Plus to verify. And I don't need to do si.content because I already have content. I can just reference content because I've captured content. So I don't think I have an SI set, or do I? So I do have my service instance set, which I did using the commands that are up here, where I first get my PyVMomi wrapper, and then from my PyVMomi wrapper, I do the _ get connection method and save that as my service instance that I can then pass into all of my automation pieces. So back down to our method, let's just validate that this is working, getting our attribute key. So content, we have our SI saved. So we're now getting our content. We could just type in content and validate that that does exist. We have a value for it. Then we can type in our CFM for our custom field manager, and there again verify that we have a value stored. So CFM, now what I was doing earlier, CFM has a parameter called field, and you can see, so this is interesting, I think my service instance, I'm wondering if I have the wrong vCenter. I'm just going to reset my service instance because I'm not seeing what I was expecting to see. So we see that our vCenter is at cblabsales.net. I'm going to do my wrapper here, PyVMomi wrapper. Store service instance again. And then we'll just run those last two commands. CFM.field. There we go. Now we're seeing multiple definitions. So each of these fields, this is where the attributes are defined inside of vCenter. Again, I'm looking for the one that is named. It's named VM _ lease, I believe. But we could do, I can go through, if I just wanted to see what's happening here, I can just go through and print the name of each of these fields. So field.name. I could also print the key here if I wanted to, but it is VM lease. It's the second one here. I know just from going through this quite a bit today that this is going to be, the key I'm looking for is 201, but what this does is it returns that attribute key. It will loop through all of the fields, it finds the one that matches. In this case, we're looking for VM _ lease, and it's going to return the key for that field. So we should get the attribute key back, and then what we can do is use that attribute key for all of our servers inside of this single vCenter. Next thing we're going to do, because we have our list of servers, we're going to loop through the list of servers. We're going to attempt to get the lease date. And if the lease date doesn't show up, we do want to catch that error, but we don't really want to take any action on it. So I'm just going to set a debug log for now that says that there was no lease date attribute found for the server, this server in vCenter, and it's going to continue. What that's going to do, it's going to move to the next server in the loop and continue to loop until it finds one that has a lease date that's valid. The lease date is, again, back into PyVMomi if we're trying to get, I'm calling this get attribute value, where I have the attribute key, which would be that 201 key from here. It's going to loop through all of the custom values set on the VM, and it's going to return the, I'm appropriate value if it's found on the virtual machine. If it's not found, it's going to raise an exception just saying that it's not found on this particular VM. So pretty straightforward, just loop logic. So by the time I get past here, it's either going to have a lease date set, or it's going to throw an exception and continue to the next server in our loop. So you know what, the one thing I don't have yet, I did change this a little bit, and I had just started to do this. I'm pulling the VCV, my virtual center virtual machine, out of this loop. I want to get that separately. I don't think I want PyVMO wrapper. I think I actually want search index. Yeah, so this is just GitHub Copilot giving me a little bit of help here. Where if it doesn't find the VM, that's another exception that we want to raise. So, and again, if the virtual machine doesn't exist in vCenter, and it should because we just finished an inventory, but maybe between the time we started the inventory and just now, somebody manually deleted that resource. Again, I don't think we want to take action on that, so we're going to skip over that as well. So I'm going to first get my virtual center virtual machine. And we're going to reference that as, we're going to call it VC_VM. So the first thing we need to do here before we try to get the lease date is get the virtual machine. So that should get us our VM. And then we need to add an exception in here. I'm going to do another logger.debug and continue on in the loop. Cannot find the server in vCenter. So this is a slightly different error because we're not getting the virtual machine from vCenter. We're going to continue on with the loop. Then we're going to attempt to get the lease date. And if we can't either get the VM or the lease date, it's just going to move on to the next CloudBolt server in the loop. And give us intelligent logs so that we can go into our logging and see exactly what's happening. If you have debug logging enabled in CloudBolt, these are going to be quite a bit more verbose than if you don't. But I like to use these debug logs to handle development efforts as I build content in CloudBolt. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to try and go through and get we're going to take the expire date that we got earlier. So our lease date, and we're going to try and convert that into a date time formatted date. The first thing we're going to do, this is expecting up to 2-digit month and day, and then this is a 4-digit year, the capital Y. If that doesn't work because they're formatted as a 2-digit date or a 2-digit year, we also want to continue to try again, but we want to set that as a second try. So if this doesn't work though, I think we probably also want to, I'm going to do one more try here. Actually, I think we can do, a finally loop. Okay, I think I lied. We can't do a finally loop. I just did a little bit of quick investigation. But here I'm going to do an additional try-catch loop inside of here. And if we can't convert the date from the expire, we want to accept on the value error again, and we want to say it's not in the appropriate format. So again, GitHub Copilot kind of filled that all in, making it look easy. It's worth the $10 a month. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to do a job.setProgress. And a setProgress log is a bit different than a logger log. And to instantiate this logger, the first thing you have to do in your scripts is to have these two statements there. So that's one of the first things I usually do in my scripts. I don't want these to be super verbose where the user can see them. But when we want them to see that something is happening, that we're taking action on, a lot of times I'll use this setProgress. And set progress is a little different in that it shows when we look at an order or a job inside of CloudBolt, set progress is kind of that window that's right in front of you where you can see everything that's happening in the current state of the job. So going to one of my jobs here, this is my set progress window. So when you use set progress, it shows up here. We don't want this to be too noisy. We only want the end user getting the information they need. And if we think about the sync VM's job, the end user is probably the administrator, is going to be one of the system administrators are probably the only ones that are going to be looking at those logs. But we only want to tell them the servers that we did import lease values for. Everything else, though, all of our other logs go into this detailed job log. And this is something that we can mask from end users from being able to see. So we can also mask those things via permissions and keep some of these verbose logs out of their hands. So that's kind of the difference between the two. This is set progress. This would be logger.info debug, warning and error. All of those things are captured in this job log. Okay, so we're setting progress. Again, we're thinking through logs as we get into this. Server.expiration date. So the next thing we're doing, because we're on this server object, since we have that expiration date formatted in the format that we're expecting for expiration date, we can simply do server.expiration date and set it here. Now the key to this, though, is if we don't save that server object, it's never going to save that expiration date. So whenever you're changing a value on a CloudBolt server, you want to make sure that you're saving it here. So that's pretty straightforward. Now, the other thing I'm kind of thinking through, one of the things I could do just to make this code a little more readable is I could go through and put some of these, I'm up to maybe 80, 90 lines for that method here. I could take this entire thing and kind of compartmentalize all of this into a sub-method called set lease date on server. And all we have to do is pass in the information that this method would, the attributes that this method's looking for, the inputs that it's looking for. I'm not going to do that now just for the sake of this video, but usually when I write code, I like to write them in smaller chunks that can be reusable by different things. And that's the reason I did this get attribute key and get attribute value from VCVM as separate methods, because at some point in the future, I may want to use this for something other than just a lease date. I might want to use that for, instead of lease date, maybe I want to use that for setting group or owner, and we take a little bit of a different logic when we're doing that. So just to call that out, these are all smaller functions that are named intelligently. So I'm almost doing documentation in my method names or my function names in CloudBolt. So just something to keep in mind as you go through this. Okay, so back down to the bottom. I'm just going to check and be sure. I think I have everything ready to go. I do only have one server. I have enough exception logic here that if I don't have the things I'm expecting, I'm never going to save any kind of expiration date on the server. So I feel pretty confident actually going and giving this a try. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go through and set up an orchestration action. We're going to do this from scratch. I don't recall what I called it. Post sync VM's expiration date. So I might call that something a little different in the console, but let's see. So it's my post sync VM's hook. I'm going to add an action here. Now, when we do this in CloudBolt, you have CloudBolt plugins, which are Python modules that run on the CloudBolt server. These CloudBolt plugins are extremely powerful, and they can be reused across different contexts. The fact that we're creating it as an orchestration action automatically creates a CloudBolt hook that is then called from this specific context, which is the synchronize from resource handlers hook point. So we're going to add a new CloudBolt plugin. Again, this is going to be post sync, maybe vCenter VMs, and set expiration. Something that tells me what this orchestration job is doing. And maybe if I change this job down the road, I would change this to be set expiration group and owner, something that's intelligent that I can look at and understand it. I'm not going to do any kind of description. We could share this CloudBolt hook that we're creating that would allow me to reuse it in multiple contexts. I don't think I need to reuse this. I could do max retries, which would allow me to say, if some system we talk to has intermittent connectivity issues, we could say retry this script up to 3 times. That way we're helping to prevent failures in our environment. I'm going to leave this as enter code later. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do fetch from URL right now. So remember earlier, I mentioned that I'm developing locally in PyCharm, but everything that I'm doing in PyCharm actually copies over to my CloudBolt server. So I have all of this content every time I save, because I'm connected to my server. It SFTPs these files over to my server in CloudBolt. So I'm just going to reference the file on the server as I set this up. I'm going to do a fetch from URL. The way we do that with a file in CloudBolt is you do a file colon, then 2 slashes, and then you write out your file path. So I'm going to do a 3rd slash because I'm under var, opt, CloudBolt, proserve, and this is a special directory, this proserve directory in CloudBolt that persists past a CloudBolt upgrade. If you're building automation in CloudBolt, I would highly recommend that anything you store on the file system should go under this proserve directory. But then I'm going to do, I believe it was vCenter, and I don't remember the name of it. So vCenter, and then I'm going to copy this name real quick. And that should load the file from the file system. So I've been developing on my file system in CloudBolt. You could do the same thing. VS Code does something very similar, except you're kind of SSH'd onto your CloudBolt server the entire time. But now we have a post-sync VMs. I think that it's synchronized just fine because it's green up top. But we can see the method that we've created. One of the things I will point out that we talked about earlier, the idea of CloudBolt inputs. Notice that least date attribute. Again, we're parsing this to look for any Django syntax because this is a templatable script. So with this being a Django template, we know that these double curly brackets is going to create an input into my script here. And then what I can do is in the context where I'm calling this CloudBolt plugin, I can set the value for that least date attribute. And I don't remember what I called it. Yeah, VM underscore lease. See if it'll let me copy it. It won't. There we go. Okay, so I'm able to copy it. I can then come back over here to my post-sync VMs. Notice there's a red exclamation point here that says that it's going to fail until all required inputs have been assigned default values. So I'm going to hit my edit button over here to the right and define my default value for that least date attribute. So remember, we are doing this because this helps me to set things environmentally. So if I wanted to use this in a different environment where maybe it wasn't VM lease, it was VM lease 1 or something similar, I can very easily export this with our export button right here, and then import it into my next CloudBolt instance, set the applicable least date attribute here, and then I'm off and running inside of CloudBolt with my orchestration. So, so this least date attribute has now been set. And again, this should fire after a sync VM's job. And I'm not, again, this is my first time running through this. You'll notice there wasn't a post VM's hook here. But what we're going to do, this is enabled. I want to see that this works. I could experience some failures. I'm not entirely sure yet. But let's go ahead and let's go over to, I'm going to start with the vCenter in question first. This will execute against all vCenters. But I'm hoping that just by doing a sync VMs on, let me see, the end of a sync VMs from resource handlers job, I think that I need to call the overarching job, which can take a while because I have 10 or 12 different resource handlers. Some of them are failing because this is my individual environment. So let's call that job. Oh, you know what? I think it is an individual. So what's interesting here is we may want to allow this to happen on an individual resource handler level. I'm going to do something real quick because I don't recall. It's the beauty of live video. You get to see me figuring things out, but I think that helps with the thought process. Again, sync VMs from resource handlers job. Okay, and this synchronize VM from resource handler's job, I believe this would be the parent job. I don't know. I'm going to try one of these smaller jobs. We'll see how this works. This may not fire my orchestration hook, but we'll find out. So I'm just going to go through and rerun this job for my individual. This is the vCenter that I want to run this for. So I'm just going to rerun this job real quick. It's already been rerun, of course. You can't rerun something more, I think. This is the rerun. There we go. There's my rerun. Let's see if it'll let me rerun that again. If not, I can go to the resource handler itself and kick off a new sync from there. So it's going through, it's checking to make sure that all of these VMs are up to date, that we have the appropriate ones. If anything's been deleted in vCenter, it's going to update those things so that we know that it's been deleted. Now, I'm assuming, because this worked just a minute ago, here we go. There we go. So we have some failure. So it made it to the hook, and I'm kind of intrigued by that. I'm going to make a change real quick and rerun this one more time. I'm going to go over to my script. I don't want to do any of this other logic yet. So I'm just going to comment the rest of this script out. But what I do want to see, actually shift that back a line just so it's lined up. What I do want to see here is I want to see, I'm not passing in any quarks yet. And what we'll do in a lot of these states is we'll pass in keyword arguments into our method. But I do want to see what quarks we're getting, because I suspect that since that ran on a single resource handler, that we're actually getting the resource handler passed in, and we don't have to loop through vCenter resource handlers. We may be able to get away with just filtering this script to only run on vSphere resource handler types, and I suspect that we're getting that resource handler passed in as a quark. So I'm going to do, again, that set progress. I don't have to do set progress. I'm going to get rid of this before I use it. I'm going to do a set progress event here where I'm going to log out my quark. So I can do an F-formatted string, and I can, not LWARGs, keyword arguments. There we go. So this should just, very first thing when it gets to this point in the process, it should print out my quarks, and I might handle this a little differently if this is the case. So let's go ahead and rerun this job. I'm going to pause while this is syncing just to save 10 or 15 seconds. Okay, so my sync VM's finished, and you'll notice here my quarks, I'm not really getting anything too interesting. I'm only getting the hook point that this fired at, which is that post-sync VMs, and the lease date attribute. So I'm not really able to filter on a specific vCenter. So the way that I've written the existing script is just fine. I'm going to uncomment that, and we're going to figure out what the error was in the last run. So I'm going to go back to sync VMs from resource handler's job, see if I can get to it from here. So cblabsales.net, this is my failure. So I'm going to go back in there just to take a look at the job logs and see where we're at. So we have, so really handy, it tells me line 44 in run. We're looking at get attribute key, so we're pretty early on in the process when it fails. So I'm going to get rid of my quarks log. I'm going to uncomment this. Might be around line 44 at this point, but we have line 44. There it is, get attribute key. So we know that we're down in this method when we hit the error. It's going to give me another line here in just a second to tell me that it doesn't have what I'm looking for. And I think I suspect what's going on here, but we'll find out here in just a minute. Attribute name. So line 117. This is actually where it's failing us on the, that's interesting. I did not handle this exception appropriately. So attribute VM lease not found in vCenter. So I thought I'd done this already. So this is, it's doing exactly what I told it to do. It's throwing that particular error because this is a different vCenter. I have 3 or 4 of them I'm hooked up to. I want to exclude them if this attribute doesn't exist in them. So let's go back over. So let's say get attribute key. We need to do a try except around get attribute key here. So it's going to log that and continue on to the next vCenter. So that should take care of that error. We're going to go ahead and save all again. Let me go back over to my window. I got to go back to my parent job and go to the last sync that I ran. Now the hope is I think, I don't know if it's going to happen for every one of these jobs or if it's just going to happen for my parent job. We'll find out here in a minute. But when I'm finishing this individual job, it's going to attempt to import attributes from all of these vCenters. So let's rerun this one more time, and hopefully we're up and running. Again, we have this MBSE demo 003. This server, we're looking to pull in that date, and it should show up as an expiration date. There's not currently an expiration date set on that machine. I do like to validate, so I'll probably try that on a different machine here in a second as well. So let's see, determining which servers from vCenter should be marked as historical synchronization. So here's our post sync VMs trigger point. So notice we don't have any, we're not seeing any set progress here showing that any of our VMs had a lease set. So maybe we did too good of an exception as we go through here. But let's take a look here. So there's a lot of information in here. Let's see, I don't recall. There we go. So no lease date attribute. So notice it skipped over NSX vCenter this time. It skipped over vCenter 01, but it looks like we are stepping into vCenter server. Let's actually, I'm going to add a log event here. After we know that that attribute exists in a vCenter, I am going to do a set progress. There we go. So this is I'm going to do job. I did not import this directly, so I've got to do the job.setProgress. So that's going to give me a little more data when I start my vCenter. It will also throw a log event here in the log, but we see that there's no lease date attribute value found for all of these servers. I do want to check to see, do I see my mb-se-demo-003? It does show in here. So it's saying no lease date attribute found for server in vCenter. Where's no lease date attribute value found? That may be, I don't want it to be lease date attribute. I want it to be, so I'm setting leases here. I think that's okay. But so I think what's happening here, let's start stepping through this in Shell Plus. So I have a server in CloudBolt. Here's just kind of my troubleshooting process. Here's the server in vCenter, but I need to find the CloudBolt server that I'm looking for. Okay, MBSE demo 003. Here's my server. If I hover over it, you'll notice below in the lower left-hand corner that it gives you the server ID. So it's 21752. So if I go over to my Shell Plus, I can say server equals server.objects.get. And then I can do ID equals 21752. And then I can print out my server and see I now have my server object. So from here, I can start to step through all of the things that I'm trying to do. Since I'm handling this on a per resource handler basis, I'm not able to loop through my resource handlers, but I do know the resource handler that this is connected to. So I can say vc equals server.resource handler, and I'm going to do a .cast. So in CloudBolt, the resource handler model is a generic model, but if we cast it, it'll give us the vSphere handler itself. So now I can print vc. So notice it's a vSphere resource handler versus if I did just server.resource handler. This is going to give me just a generic resource handler, but we want the typed resource handler for this because this is where the wrapper lives. The wrapper is not tied to the generic resource handler model. So I now have a vCenter. From that vCenter, I can go through and get my PyVMomi wrapper. I can get my service instance for PyVMomi, and I can get my search index from my service instance. So I now have my search index. Now here's one of the cool things with CloudBolt that we can do. I can first of all get my attribute key, because I need that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to import these two methods, because this is, I think, where we're running into issues, is with one of these two. So I'm going to do, in CloudBolt, I can do from, and then I can reference my folder under ProServe. So we load in the ProServe directory so that we can reference it in Python. So I can do from vCenter, I can even tab it out, which is really handy, .postsync VMs, import, and I'm going to do get attribute key and get attribute value from VCVM. Actually, I'm going to do all three of these. So get attribute value from VCVM is kind of the parent one that calls the two sub methods. But I want to get as close to it as I can. So I'm going to import all three of these. The first thing I'm going to start with, though, is getting the attribute key, because until we have an attribute key, we can't pass it in to get the value. So, oh, you know what I did wrong? That's why this is messed up. So we'll get there. We'll figure it out. So I'm going to do get attribute key, and I'm going to test each one of these methods individually. So my attribute key, I'm expecting my service instance. I'm expecting my attribute name, which was VM underscore release. And then I'm also expecting my resource handler, which in my case, I saved it as VC. So I should get 201. That's what we were expecting. So that works. Now if I do get attribute value, and I do my VM, I don't have my VC VM yet, so I also need to import. I'm going to just add this to the same one, get VC VM from server. So let's do VC underscore VM equals get VC VM from server, because we need to get the vCenter object in PyVMomi, and we're expecting our VC VM and the search index. So we have our search index, or we're expecting our server and our search index. So this should give us our VC VM, so we can print out the VM here. So we have the VM, we've captured it. We can now go down to getting our attribute. We know our attribute key is 201. We need to get our attribute value now, but I'm pretty sure this is wrong. Get attribute value. We have our VC underscore VM, and we have our attribute key should be 201. Now, I think what I may have done is maybe I didn't convert this appropriately. We'll see. We'll see what happens. So there is an attribute value, and it was returned. Now what I'm wondering, it's really interesting. Why did I not get that value returned? Let's try it. So it looks like calling get attribute key directly and get attribute value directly gives me the value that I'm looking for. So the next thing I'm going to do is take it up a level, and I'm going to do the kind of parent function and see if this works. VC underscore VM. If this doesn't work, get attribute. Oh, okay, so there we go. So that's where I messed up. There was an error. I'm surprised this didn't show. Because I'm dismissing my errors in my error handling, this isn't showing that. So I do need to grab I'm passing the resource handler into my get attribute key so that I can say which vCenter we're looking for in the log. So I do need to pass that all the way through the chain. So get attribute key, I need to pass in my resource handler, and then I'm going to pass it into the method, and then I need to find where I'm calling this method from and pass it in here as well. Get attribute value from VCVM. And this needs to be VCVM attribute name and resource handler. So VCVM, I didn't pass in my resource handler. There we go. Because originally I had this kind of shifted around a little bit. And instead of resource handler, it's going to be VC for vCenter. They're interchangeable. I probably should keep them uniform, but this is a quick example that we're running through here. So now what I should be able to do, since that's all passed in, is I could either exit shell plus, reload, and go back through all of that. But to get all of those variables set and everything, it's a lot easier for me to just go over to my resource handler, select my cblabsales.net resource handler, and then I can, from here, I can synchronize my servers. And this should be the same exact method that we were calling earlier. It should invoke the same job. We can get over to the job, and we can track progress of it from here. Okay, the job's now finished. So you'll notice it is logging that starting query for servers in vCenter.cblabsales.net. I'm still not seeing my log for, I'm not seeing the log for that specific instance. And I have a couple of suspicions. One is that I don't know if this refreshed my script when I saved. It could have, but I'm not entirely sure. So I'm going to look for 003 server just to make sure I'm still getting the log instance. Yeah. So no least data attribute found for server MB SE demo. So the first thing I'm going to do is just to be sure that this job is updated. I want to go over to my orchestration actions, and sometimes just loading this view will force it to pull from the file system. It may already be pulled just because we just ran it from here. But if I look here, I should now see that I'm passing in my resource handler. There's my resource handler that I passed in. There's my resource handler that I passed in. And get attribute value from VCVM. Here's my VCVM. Here's my resource handler getting passed in. The other thing I could do is I could include my error warning here. If this happens again, I'm going to update my code to include my error and just print out the error here. Just that way we see why it may have missed that get attribute value from VCVM here. And maybe it's the lease date that it's fighting with now. I don't know entirely yet, but we're not seeing the lease date is not in format. We're still here. No lease date attribute value found. Yep. So I think that we're in the right place. So now we know that the CloudBolt system, the orchestration action, is up to date because we see it in the UI. What we can do is go back, and I'm going to just rerun this job, try it one more time. Okay, so I'm seeing the same thing again. So I'm going to open up my logging a little bit. I want to see, because I think I'm getting an error there. I'm squashing it right now because I don't want to know about it. So I'm just going to print it out in the logs and see what we're getting from that. So this is where we're hitting this. I'm going to say I don't need to print this for everything. I really don't care about anything but that one server. So if server host name equals MB SE demo test. I don't remember what it's called. MB.SE-demo-003. Actually, see if they'll let me copy it. A little more foolproof. So let's say if equals to that, we want to logger.debug There we go. So that should print out an error for my one server. Let's go ahead and save all. I am going to refresh and just verify that I'm seeing that in the UI first, just to validate that that is up to date. So just refresh this page real quick. Should be enough to get it to do that job. Once the page refreshes, we can scroll back down and see. here it is. So here's our logic. It's loaded in the system. We know that that's up to date now. I'm going to go back. The one thing, I keep rerunning the job, but I think what I want to do here is actually just re-kick it off from scratch. Sometimes a rerun of a job might cache some of the old code. This just verifies that it isn't doing that. I don't think it is, but let's sync VMs from vCenter hopefully one more time. Here's our job. Okay, just probably seeing the same things. Okay, but let's see if we're seeing the error towards the bottom now. Hey, look at that error. Vim virtual machine has no attribute retrieve content. So that's interesting because I was getting it worked in Shell Plus. So let's see. Are we doing a retrieve content anywhere? Okay. Here's the problem. The attribute key. I think I'm using the wrong thing in the wrong place. Don't need to get, actually attribute, you know what I did? This is entirely my fault. I had attribute key being done at a lower level here. But I'm actually calling it in two places now. If we see this, there's 3 results. I'm calling it in my master, and I'm calling it all the way up top here. So we don't need to do all of that. We do, remember, I think we started on this. I never updated the code because it was all over the place. But let's go ahead, let's get rid of this get attribute key. We actually don't need to get, I don't think we need this get attribute value from VCVM at all anymore because we're calling this get attribute value, that's all we're doing for this. It's just kind of a redundant function at this point. Get attribute key we're already calling, but now we need to call get attribute value with the key. So that's the last thing we should have to do, and I didn't store this either, so let's do, notice it's going gray because we're not using it here. So get attribute value from VCVM, we're just going to knock that down a line and replace it with, we know that this is my VC underscore VM. There's my attribute key. I don't really need the rest of this because I'm doing it elsewhere. And now my attribute key is lit up because we're using it. Our VCVM we're passing in. We should now be able to get our lease date from here. So let's go ahead and save all. I think I can remove this logic here in a minute, but I'm going to validate first. Again, just because I want to validate that those changes have taken. So we're going to refresh in the system to validate that it's pulling the latest file changes. Which, that wasn't the issue before, that was me messing up coding. So here we go. Get attribute value, that's saved. Now we can go ahead, I'm going to rerun this job. I'm going to live dangerously this time. Okay, so our job finished, and look at this. We finally have an expiration date set on our server. So let's go find the server object, just validate that that action has been taken. Here's our server. The lease should be set now to May 11th, so 2023. Now, one of the other things, and I think it'll show up here as well, we still see the VM lease as a separate value here because we have a separate recurring job that's pulling in attributes from VMware. But this is just two different sides to the same coin. Yeah, so very, very usable to be able to update things. Again, I think 2 of the more relevant things that a lot of customers would be asking for is how do we use this post-sync VMs hook to update group or owner? I think those are, for onboarding, are probably 2 of the first things that we would want to tackle. But you know, if you can use ChatGPT and navigate a little bit of the PyVMomi API, this is all within the realm of possibility inside of CloudBolt. So again, just as a review, we were tackling a business case today of being able to onboard in an automated fashion to help prevent from manual errors all of our existing inventory into CloudBolt, but as we onboard it, taking some kind of action. In this case, we read a vCenter attribute and set that as a parameter inside of CloudBolt. So automating CloudBolt, automating that onboarding process so that this is now an easy process, and we know based off of our business logic that this metadata that we have already inside of our environment, we can ingest and leverage as part of our automation story. So again, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to your account team at CloudBolt. We'd be more than happy to dive into a deeper demo on some of these capabilities, or if you had just a question of how to do this maybe a little bit differently, please let us know. We're happy to help. So thanks again for spending some time with us today.